Alrighty, welcome in. We are here with Amy, and we are talking about parenting today, and particularly parenting and fitness, which is kind of the theme of the whole podcast. But
Yeah.
we're gonna really dive into kind of the identity of a parent, the hurdles of a parent
Mm-hmm.
with their fitness, and uh, the theme for this in my head, the phrase for this in my head is the road not traveled. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today. And if you've listened for a little bit, you've heard me talk about this. I think I talked about it a little bit at the end of the last episode, if I remember. Not related to parenting, but related to something else. But we're going to really dive into it, thinking about parenting today. So, want to start here. I think it's tempting and natural at times to think about the road not taken in our lives. I think that it's a natural thing to do, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing or we should feel guilty about it. Although I think we naturally do feel guilty about it when we do think about the road not taken. But I also think that it's a little bit disingenuous to pretend that we don't. So if we think about parenting as a for instance, right, this is, but I'll actually start not with parenting. I'll start with something else, then I'll go with parenting. So, and I think I've told this story before, but I oftentimes think about the road not traveled when it comes to my business, because this is going to link back to what we're talking about here. But I think about what would have happened if I started my career 5 years earlier, if I hadn't taught. Did we talk about this on the last episode?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. So if I hadn't taught for 5 years and I had, when I took my coaching classes in college, realized that I really liked it and started down this path as a 22-year-old, where would I be in my career if I was 11, 12 years into it, or even started right out of high school? You know, like some of the people who I know who are my age in the fitness space, but are 15 years into their careers. And they obviously had some growing pains along the way, but are now like leaders in the industry and have grown really big businesses and things like that at, you know, their early 30s because they started sooner.
Because I started earlier, right?
Yeah. And so it's easy for me to think about the road not taken at times and be like, oh, what if I had done, like in college, if I had my sophomore year pivoted and done kinesiology and gone into personal training or coaching right then. But the flip side of that is I wouldn't have met Megan. Because Megan
Can you even
and
imagine?
I met. No, like, and I can't think about my life independent of Megan, because we've known each other now for 14 years. You know, it's like half my life, basically. I've known her. A little less than half my life has been with her. And so much of who I am has been impacted by knowing Megan. And so we met in a education class my sophomore year. So had I not continued to pursue education, I wouldn't have met her. And I don't know where I would be as a person, as a coach, who all of this without her. And I almost don't want to think about that. Like, I don't want to think about what I might have is certainly not worth what I know I wouldn't have, if that makes any sense. What I might have from a career perspective is not worth the cost of, I would certainly not have what I have with Megan and all of the things that have come from that, our children, our home, and our lives together, and all of these things are a byproduct of the fact that I was in education. And then I could go one step further and like nuts and bolts and be like, I think that I, in some ways, am a better coach having taught for 5 years and went through an education and did a master's degree in education. And I joke all the time that I have this master's degree that I never use anymore. But the flip side of it is like,
but you do.
I learned some things through that. Yeah. That maybe potentially helped me become a better coach. And again, I don't know, but I don't know what I don't know, but it's certainly possible that if I had started my career as a trainer at 22, I wouldn't have made it. Because we've talked a little bit about on here, like 22-year-old Jeff was a little bit of an arrogant butthead. And there might not have been a lot of grown adults who were willing to listen to 22-year-old Jeff. And so it maybe helped me having a little bit of life under my belt when I started training to do things a little differently than if I had started when I was 22 or 18. And again, I don't know. That's the road not taken. But I know that there are certainly benefits to the road that I did take. And I think that we do this
sometimes
with
I feel like
parenting is... Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's all right. Sometimes I feel like we look back at the choices we could have made and we look at it, even though it's one path that we didn't take, we look at it in 100 different ways. Like, what could have been the outcome if I had done that? It could have been this, or it could have been this, or it could have been this, or it could. So I think it's one of the ways that we kind of like settle ourselves as we say, that was unpredictable too. That was completely unpredictable. And it could have turned out really poorly. So this decision that I made was the exact right one for the time.
And even if we don't know if it was the right one, we can also recognize that the things that we have as a result of it, we might not have. And so thinking about, whatever, glass half full, but the theme that I'm going to get into is like, what are those as superpowers? Like, how are those advantages versus the disadvantages that we might have possibly gotten or, not had we gone a different direction? Like, a quote unquote disadvantage to my career is that I didn't start earlier. But I also have advantages in my career that I wouldn't have had if I had started earlier. So I think that the one that I think that if parents are honest, we oftentimes do this, that we think about a little bit the road not traveled when it comes to kids. Like, what would life be like had I not had kids? Not to say that we don't love our kids, not to say that we wish that we didn't have kids, but it's like you see a moment and you're like, oh, what would like life have been like had I, done this? Or if you have multiple kids, what would it have been like if I had only one? Or if you only have one, what would it have been like if you had multiple? And we think about the road not traveled. And it's not to say that you regret where you are, but it's like, oh, what would it be like? But particularly not having kids. And or like, I don't know, I think we oftentimes find ourselves thinking longingly of the moments of like not having to be responsible for a whole other human. And
there are times where I don't feel like I'm grown up. I'm not grown up enough to take care of myself sometimes.
Yeah.
And I have 100%. To take care of a whole other human and make sure that like she's okay and she turns out to not be a jerk, which I think we're doing an okay job. She seems pretty nice. I like her so far.
She's fantastic. No, I joke about it all the time. It's like I feel like I need an adult. Like, I need adult supervision for parenting. Like, I'm not adult enough to be in charge of this. And it was wild when like you leave the hospital after like 2 days and you're like, are none of you coming with us? Like,
I know. They're like, okay, here you go. Good luck.
And I've joked about this a lot. Like the fact that you have to sit through Like you have to do driver's ed, take a written test and a driving test in order to drive a car, but they'll just
Mm-hmm.
let anybody take a kid home with
Mm-hmm.
no nothing. Because
Yep.
you had unprotected sex, you can take care of a human life. Like that's
Yep.
like that is the requirements for taking care of a human.
Yep.
Is you had yeah, it's
You
wild.
made one,
You
so
made one,
yep.
therefore you get to keep it. Like that's the deal. It's just like what?
No, it's
So
totally wild.
I think about I think we oftentimes can think about like why we miss maybe the independence or the time
Mm-hmm.
where we were only responsible. And I don't know about you, but and maybe it was because we had kids. I don't know if we had them young, but like we had them at I think I just turned 29 when we had Levi. Um, so that's not
Mm-hmm.
young, but it's also not, people are having kids certainly older here. But there's moments where I'm like, I don't feel like I took advantage of not having kids as much as I could have. And the
Mm-hmm.
freedom to like, just travel whenever and go out. Like we just didn't do that. No. And again, we just like, we were figuring out our lives. And so we just
Mm-hmm.
didn't do some of those things. And so we can get into a place where I can think about the road not taking it. So now again, I'm going to bring it back to business, and then I'll bring it to fitness for a moment, or for the
Okay.
rest of it. But um, for me, like I'm a part of a mentorship, and I've met even beyond that at conferences that I go to and these types of things. I've met dozens, if not over 100 coaches who are uh, doing really, really well with their businesses and don't have kids. And I think I
Mm-hmm.
said this when I came back from Dallas. Like, I am a unicorn in the fitness space,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that uh, it is a young man's game a little bit. Like, there's a very much like a gap, right, for people who are at my stage in their careers, which
Mm-hmm.
is you're either younger, oftentimes without kids, or you are older and your kids are older, and this is kind of, you're in your late 40s and this is kind of a second career, or you are stay at home or whatever, and now you have a little bit more freedom because your kids are a little bit more independent and now you can do this. There
Mm-hmm.
are some primary caregiver moms in the space, but there are not a ton. And there
Mm-hmm.
are, I have yet to meet, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I want to find one, a primary caregiver dad who started his business right around the time that he had kids. I don't know of any um, who do that, because my business, my first online client was July of 2020, and Levi was born in August of 2020, or in April of 2020. So like they were simultaneous. Like
Mm-hmm.
personal training, I've been doing it for 5 years, a little more than 5 years, 5.5 years, but it was like right around. It was a side gig that I was hoping to grow for 2019, and then COVID hits, and then it becomes the main thing when my son was born. And so I have 3 kids, and we have a lot of help, and we're very lucky to do that. And my wife is incredibly involved with our kids, but in terms of like point person, I'm on a good week this coming school year. I will have 4 working days from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's what my workday will be. 4 working days in a week. That will not happen
Mm-hmm.
probably at least a third, if not half of the weeks of the school year. But
Yep.
that would be like an ideal. And that's the first time since 2020 I'll have 4 workdays, at least scheduled. I've built my business on 2 or 3 workdays, and oftentimes half days, like where I work for half the day and then I have a kid for half the day.
Mm-hmm.
That's and I've built it to a point where I have a respectable business and things like that, but it's certainly not what some of my peers who are
Mm-hmm.
around my age who don't have kids or who have kids, but their wife is the primary caregiver, or whatever, they're divorced, or whatever it is, where they don't have that and they can work 40, 50. Like I know one of the guys who I have a lot of respect for, that dude must work 80, 90 hours a week. Like he loves to
Mm-hmm.
work, and he's great at it, and he's built a great business. And listen, I love doing what I do. So like if I had more time, I would fill it with
Mm-hmm.
doing stuff for this. But there are, um, it's tough for me when we started and we were around the same point and those guys take off,
Mm-hmm.
because they have the time and the opportunity in a certain way to grow their business to be a certain thing. And there's little parts of me that's like, oh man, where would I be, um, had I not do that? Because there are some people who have whatever, a good work life balance or are around a lot for their kids, but those guys typically are the ones that started earlier and grew their
Mm-hmm.
business to the point where
Right,
it
and it
was
was
running
established
fairly
early.
effectively before having kids. So like
Yeah.
an example that I give is a guy named Jordan Syatt, who I've talked about a little bit. I think he's like a year
Mm-hmm.
or two older than me, and I know Jordan okay. Like I've chatted with him a few times. He knows my name. But he trained Gary Vee. He's got 900,000 Instagram followers. He has a fairly successful business, um,
Mm-hmm.
and online business, but he started when he was like 18 years old. And so he had a really successful business, and then he has a daughter, and he's about to have another kid, and so he can be home a lot with his kids.
Mm-hmm.
But he built the infrastructure out for a really solid business prior to having kids,
Mm-hmm. And that was
and
his
so,
choice.
and that was his choice, and he did that, and so now he
Right.
can kind of do that sort of thing. And so that's a little bit of the going back to earlier, like, oh, if I had started earlier, where might I be? Would I be in
Mm-hmm.
Jordan's shoes? Or there's people who are, um, a little bit further along, who's similar situation, like Don Saladino, who I have a ton of respect for.
Mm-hmm.
Don, who's the one who trained your man crush Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively and all these guys.
Ooh,
So Don had
just love them.
kids and raised his kids, and was around for his kids, but his wife was stay at home mom and now she helps
Mm-hmm.
him run their business, Mel, and she's fantastic. But his kids are older,
Mm-hmm.
and so she can kind of
Mm-hmm.
work a little bit more. But she still like kind of does that on a little bit on the the back end side of things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so you have those people, or you have people who just don't have kids, who are in that in that age. Luca and uh, Molly and Kelsey and Den. There's no wrong reason for that, but like people
Mm-hmm.
who there's not a lot of models for what it is that I'm doing. And so there's times where I look at those people who are kind of peers in the space with me, who can work a lot and do a lot of things. And I'm like, man, if I didn't have kids, where would my business be? And it's not to say that I don't, I regret the fact that I am primary caregiver. I enjoy it. That doesn't mean that there's also not tension with that, where there's times where I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I was expecting to work today. Like there are things that I need to do, and there's a child home with me. And
Mm-hmm.
so that doesn't mean that there's not stress with that. But it's like, it's a choice. Like we could send Levi to daycare. We're sending the twins to daycare 3 days a week this coming school year. We're sending Levi 2 days a week. And the reason we're not sending Levi 3 days a week, it wouldn't cost us that much money to send him for an additional day, like relative
Mm-hmm.
to the ridiculous amount that we're spending
Right.
on
Right.
childcare. And I could certainly like make that money back with the extra day. But this is his last year before he starts kindergarten. And so it's literally my last opportunity for basically his whole life to have a day that's like, it's you and me, my man.
Just him. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing that. The 1 day a week I'm not working is designed to be a Daddy and Levi day, where I have no work scheduled or anything like that, and he and I can just whatever, have some fun, do some projects, go to museums. Like he's been asking me for
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks now. He's like, Daddy, can we go dig up fossils? And I don't know where we're going to dig up fossils, but by gum, this fall, we're going to find a place to dig up some fossils. Like, I will find it and we will go. And so those are conscious choices that I'm making, but that doesn't mean that there's not a cost to that choice. And I can tangibly see at times the cost of that choice. And that can be challenging when you see, we can see the drawbacks, we can see the hurdles, we can see the obstacles and the challenges that our decisions have led us to, and we can also see a little bit of the grass is greener on the other side. If this wasn't the case, like, this is my challenge, and if I didn't have this, then I would be doing XYZ over here. But this is the thing that I've really tried to think through, similar to the what would have happened had I pivoted to training in college. I coach parents. I coach primarily moms at this point. Oftentimes primary caregivers who are struggling with a lot of the same things that I am. And I have heard from many of them that one of the best things about working with me is that I'm in it with them. And a lot of it doesn't mean that I'm not coming from a place of I have some things figured out, but I also can empathize with some of the struggles, and I can sort of recognize, make some analogies that are helpful and some strategies that are practical. And I'm reading a book right now that has nothing to do with fitness, but it's called Habits of the Household. It's called Habits of the Household.
Sometimes you need to take a break.
And it's about like rituals and some things like that for the house, particularly in the light of being a Christian and trying to find God in like the daily chaos of being a parent. And one of the things that he said in one of the earliest pages of the book was, he's like, I'm writing this from a messy house, which is the framework that he's going into this with is like, he tells the story early on of like why he started doing this. It was like the chaos of bath time. I was like, oh, that's me last night. You know what I mean? Like,
sounds familiar.
And that's his whole premise is like, these are things that I have figured out in the midst of this. I'm also not saying this from a place of I have it all figured out. And I'm also just telling you that this is an ongoing thing that we're navigating. But I also am writing it because I recognize the necessary nature of it, because I'm in the mess. Like I'm trying, I wrote this page on the notes on my phone while a kid was sitting on my lap at 4:00 in the morning. Like I wrote this page, at 9 p.m. because I had to come home early. Like I'm sitting in the car waiting to go upstairs for dinner, and I hear the chaos above me as I write this paragraph. And it was a comforting thing as I'm reading this book. And when you read books like this, you see the gap between where you are and what you might like to do. And it's comforting to know that the guy on the other end isn't dictating from a place of non-empathy, but is in it with you. And those are not theories, but at least things that he actually is tried and is doing and has had some degree of success with. And so there's a value to that. So that, I think, has been one of the things that has been really helpful for me in my business, both with helping my clients and even relating to people who are not my clients and reaching people who have become clients is the fact that they feel like I'm speaking to them and I understand the things that they're going through, and I
Mm-hmm.
understand them better than I could have possibly if I didn't have kids. That doesn't mean that somebody without kids can't coach people with kids or vice, whatever. Or I don't understand the challenges of somebody who's single or has older kids, right? Like there are things, but certainly there are advantages for me working with parents, knowing that because there's no way that you can. I don't think of anything else that's like this. You can kind of say it about like the Grand Canyon. Have you ever seen the Grand Canyon?
I have. It's incredible in
Yeah.
person.
And the Grand Canyon is one of those things. It's one of the very few things in life that you can't overhype it.
Nope.
Like there are no words that you can use to describe the Grand Canyon that are going to accurately depict it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you stand in front of it, it will always surpass your understanding or any
Mm-hmm.
description or photo that you had done.
Mm-hmm.
Parenting is also like that. It doesn't
Correct.
matter how much people tell you about parenting
Mm-hmm.
until you're in it, you can't understand what they're talking about. And it really doesn't matter um, at all. And it's not a fault. It's not a personality flaw that you don't understand it, but it's a binary thing that like because also like if you understood parenting before having kids, I don't know if a lot of people would like
We
volunteer
wouldn't have
for it.
gone through with it.
No,
Nope.
because it's difficult also in the same way to understand the upside of parenting and the relationship you have with your kids, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't really describe that as well. Like it's
True.
difficult to describe like somebody is going to scream in your face, say horrible things to you, hit you, like tell you you're the worst, like in any other circumstance would be considered an assault, and 30 seconds later will snuggle into you and you will snuggle them right back. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can't actually fathom that without kids. It's next to impossible to do that. And so the fact that I do has certainly helped me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I wouldn't have been able to whatever, but it's certainly helped me in ways that, in the same way that maybe teaching has helped me, but probably more so to be a better coach for the parents that I'm working with and grow my business in that way. So the thing that I can see as a hurdle or an obstacle in some ways to my business is also a superpower in my
Mm-hmm.
business. And if I think about the road not taken, I'm also I have to acknowledge the cost of a known benefit, which is and this is not like I haven't, I'm not trying to use my kids as like they're growing my business. That's not the point of this. Hopefully people get
Right.
that at this point. But like I am better off, or maybe not, I don't know if I'm better off, but I'm certainly have an advantage, a superpower as a coach and building my business as a coach for parents by having kids and being in it and having multiple kids and having twins.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can also say to almost every parent that I had 3 kids under 2 in
Mm-hmm.
COVID. You know what I mean? Like we went through some stuff. You know what I mean? Like we've been through some things. That doesn't mean that a lot of people go through a lot of different things, but like we have had a not super simple path to this.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, we had a miscarriage in the middle of this. We It was kind of a surprise that we had twins. They were closer together than we were expecting. We didn't have simple pregnancies. All of this stuff. We had some scary things happen post delivery. Like, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things that we've experienced that have a way that a mentor described it to me is we can oftentimes think of life as a ladder, like I'm climbing to the next rung,
Mm-hmm.
but life is more
Mm-hmm.
like a map where you're exploring different parts of the page. And it's not an ascent, but you're exploring different areas. And so we have explored
Mm-hmm.
a lot of areas that we might not have had we not had kids, or if we had one kid, or if we'd had, you know what I mean? But there's also
Mm-hmm.
things that you've experienced having one kid that I haven't experienced having multiple kids. You know what I mean? Like, we all have
Mm-hmm.
unique experiences that give us unique superpowers that oftentimes are the same thing. Those superpowers are oftentimes the same things that we think of as potential hurdles and
Our fault.
obstacles.
Yeah.
And I'll take it one step further with my business. And then I'll get into the fitness side of things, because this is a really good lead into that. I could think about from a revenue perspective, right? Oh, I could work more and therefore make more money. I had more time at one point in my life, and I didn't fill it with work.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I filled it with other things. I don't know if I necessarily would work 60 or 70 hours a week if I didn't have kids,
Right.
if I had never had kids, right? It would be different if, I don't even want to say this, right? But like, if all of a sudden everything was gone, alternate universe,
Mm.
and the me from right
Yeah.
now is plugged into a situation where I don't have kids, like Click or something like that. The Adam Sandler movie where all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden he's like, oh, I don't have any kids. Or I forget what the scenario is, but like, alternate universe. I
Mm-hmm.
think that Jeff would probably do that. But the Jeff that has never had kids and never had a mortgage, you know what I mean? Like, 26-year-old Jeff wouldn't work 60 hours a week. That Jeff would play golf a lot. That Jeff
Yeah.
would
Have
do
fun.
other single person things, the things that you do when you
Yeah.
don't have the responsibilities for other things. And so there's actually a study on this, and it's universally kind of acknowledged, and this makes sense if we think about it. We can have the perception of it a certain way, but married people make more money on average than single people.
Hmm.
Married people with kids make more money than married people. This is typically talking about men, because you again, stereotypical. Oftentimes, women, when they have kids, they stay at home mom, whatever. So men, right? Let's just say
Mm-hmm.
men, right? Single men oftentimes don't make as much money as married men. Married men with kids oftentimes will make more money than married men, and then married men with multiple kids make more money than married men with fewer kids. Why? Because
Added
the
pressure.
things cost money. Kids cost money.
Yeah.
And it's not
Oh my God.
costing money
Yes.
that's like, oh, this is optional. It's not costing money that's like, oh, if I don't make it, then I just golf less. It's like, no, if I don't make a certain amount of money, then we got a mortgage and we got to pay childcare, like, which is a
Mm-hmm.
mortgage in and of itself. It's like, somebody's got to get paid.
Totally is. Yep.
Like, money it's not necessarily just for funsies. It's not like, oh, we're not going to go on as many vacations this year. Maybe it is, but it's also like, my kids can't do activities. We really want to get Levi into gymnastics, but we got to have the conversation of like, where are we going to find that money?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that we can't find it, but we have to like be mindful of it. And it's for him, because we know he would love it. We know he would go
Mm-hmm.
bonkers to do gymnastics. Like, that kid would out of his mind to do it. Like, is Charlie going to do dance? Like, what are we, you know what I mean? All of these things that we would love to do. And so the stakes are higher. The pressure is higher, but in a positive way. We talked about stress for a long time, but it's like it can be positive or negative depending on how you handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And people kind of handle this differently, but like, you can't really afford to fail. And so in the same way that I'm like, oh man, my kids, I would make more money if I didn't have kids. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Because I wouldn't be as incentivized. It's like, okay, I have time today and I don't have anything going on. Am I going to work, or is it nice out? Like, maybe I go to the pool. I know, because I did this when I was 26 years old and I had the flexibility to do it. You know what I did in the summers until we decided to finally start like paying off our debt? I just sat by the pool and read books all day. It was fantastic. But it was like I didn't have to do anything. And so it wasn't like I was out there grinding. It was like, no, I just did what I wanted to do, because there was no consequence to me not doing it besides my own enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are, in the same way that this is, again, a hurdle or an obstacle or a challenge for me, it's also a superpower for me. Because the stakes are higher. Like, they need me. My family needs me to do this, to succeed with my business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't have the choice of failing. I can't diddle around. I have to do well. And we feel that. And we recognize that. And so in the same ways that this could be a challenge, it's also a superpower. And I think that this is the truth when it comes to our fitness as parents. Because it is harder. Like, we need to acknowledge this. It is harder for somebody with kids to be in shape, get in shape, stay in shape. It is. Because there are more demands on your time. Who's going to watch the kids? Am I going to work out at home? Am I going to work out at the gym? There's a cost to it. Do I have that money to spend on a gym membership, food, a coach, whatever it is? Or does that money have to go to stuff for the kids? There's not as much time to prepare food. Kids don't like the food that I made. Like, I made dinner and I have to make something else for the kids because they don't want the meal that I made. Because it's not dino nuggets and spiral pasta, like
Annie's mac and cheese in this house.
Yeah, right. It's not Annie's mac and cheese.
Right.
Or it's on the wrong color plate.
Yep.
No.
That's not my bowl. That's your bowl. My bowl's pink.
Yep. My kids won't eat Annie's mac and cheese if I make it. It's got to be that mom makes it. She mixes it. I don't know. But it's just like, that's just their perspective on it, right? It's like, it's got to be this way. Levi, last night, we went to a place for dinner and we got him pizza. And it had a couple of flecks of parsley on the top. And he wouldn't eat pizza, which is his favorite food. Like, you wouldn't even know. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even there. And he wouldn't eat it because it had gross stuff on it. And even if I picked it all off, it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like, we're not talking about, oh, this pizza came with mushrooms on it and I pulled the mushrooms off. It's like, no, every pizza has flecks of parsley on it. It was just different pizza, These are the challenges of parents. For parents when they were trying to do this. Like, it's just, they're up in the middle of the night or it's all of these things. And so you don't get great sleep. And your stress is higher because the common phrase of like having a kid is like wearing your heart outside of your body. And it's like the
Mm-hmm.
stress of like I leave my kids somewhere or they're doing something that I don't really know, and you worry about them. And am I raising a jerk? Am I raising a good kid? Is this normal? Or are they a serial killer in disguise? Like, what is happening with my kid? Like, is this normal behavior? Are they sick? Or is this really bad? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Em had a
the
fever the other day,
stakes.
and she hasn't had one in so long that I was like, I kind of forget how to take care of this. And, like, you go through these
Mhm.
phases where your kids are super sick all the time, like when they're little. She hasn't had a fever in 3 years, so obviously I'm like, well, something that I did, or something that I exposed her to, or whatever it is. She's fine. It was like she was just real tired for a day, and that was completely fine. But like, you forget sometimes how hard parenting can be.
100%. And these are hurdles. And we need to acknowledge them as
Mm.
hurdles. But it's easy to think about the road not traveled, right? Particularly for
Mm.
moms, right, whose bodies went through pregnancy. And we talked a
Mm-hmm.
lot about this on the pregnancy series. Like your body will always tell the story of what it did. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a major thing that happened. It doesn't mean that you can't become really fit or love the confident in the body that you're in post having kids, but that also it doesn't mean that that's going to just be gone. And it's easy to think about the road not traveled and be like, oh, I wish that I was XYZ. Like I was in great shape before kids, or it was a lot easier. Like it's very easy to think that. And it doesn't mean that we can't be honest with ourselves that we are thinking that and acknowledge that, right? Like, but
Mm-hmm.
the way forward is not to live in a place where we're thinking about the road not traveled, but rather to acknowledge the ways in which our hurdles are actually superpowers. Because here's the thing, in the same way that the stakes are higher for parents to make more money, the stakes are higher for parents to be in shape.
Mm-hmm.
You have more of a why than a deeper why and a more rooted why than somebody that doesn't mean that they don't have one, right? But then somebody who's like, I just want
Mm-hmm.
to, look good, feel good in my body. Now they might have a real why because they're like, hey, I want to feel good in my body and all these things. Find a spouse, right? They're single, whatever it is. All of these things, acknowledge that. But the questions of longevity, am I going to be around a long time? Am I showing my kids what it looks like to be healthy and take care of my body? Am I showing them what it's
Mm-hmm.
like to be active? Am I keeping up with them? Do I have the energy to show up for them in the way that I want to? Am I present with
Mm-hmm.
them, or am I thinking about my body? Am I going swimming, or am I, staying on the sidelines? What am I present in the moment with them, or am I like feeling uncomfortable in my clothes? Like, do my kids see that when they see me look in the mirror? All of those things are deep, real reasons why the stakes are
Mm-hmm.
higher. And that's a superpower because we can't afford to fail. In the same way that my business cannot afford to fail, failure is not an option. I can't give
Mm-hmm.
up just because it's hard, because I have to do it to take care of my family. In the same way, I also have to do the hard things to take care of my body for my family
Mm-hmm.
because they need me. And those drivers and those reasons should not be overlooked. And then we can get into the nuts and bolts of it too. You want to know what I do on like a day-to-day life, day? We talked about it when I was single and I didn't have any kids. I just sit around and do nothing. I will
Mm-hmm.
have 6,000 steps on a low activity day just being dad at my house. Like if I was
Mm-hmm.
sitting at home with my kids and I never left my house, we didn't go outside, we didn't do anything. We just like existed at home and I was on dad duty, I will get 6,000 steps without trying. I could actively try not to move and I would get 6,000 steps just by existing as dad, right? Whereas if I was single and I have to give up, like I could go a whole day and I could get 2,000 steps. Just sit on the couch and watch TV
Mm-hmm.
all day. And I've done that. 1,500 steps. I'm going to have to move. I'm going to move more just by doing it. I'm going to have to be more conscientious of planning meals because I got to know what they're going to eat. I can't get to the end of the night and be like, "Oh, it's dinner time. What are we going to eat?" You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be hungry. We have to have something. So, grocery store and planning meals and thinking it through, all of that stuff, the preparation that you do for your kids. Like, think about the preparation that you do to leave the house with a child, a young child. You pack the backpack, you have spare clothes, you have diapers, you have wipes, you have snacks, you have activities, you have, car seat and all these things. Like all of those things that you do, that's a skill that you develop as a parent that is very easily translatable to like, I also never leave the house for myself without more than enough food to carry me until I'm going to be home. Like you would never leave the
That's
house in
smart.
a situation where you're like, if I don't find food, my children will have a nightmare. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't not
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge, oh, we got to figure out a way for them to have a nap. You're not going to just skip nap. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
figure out a way
No,
to do
no.
nap because otherwise you'll die or
Mm-hmm.
they will die. And like so in the same way like that skill could be translated to okay, you can plan a bedtime. You could do a bedtime
Mm-hmm.
routine. All of these things that you have to develop as a parent because you're trying to take care of your kids and you want the best for your kids are also the reasons and the superpowers that you need to do the things that a single person doesn't really have to do or a person without
Mm-hmm.
kids doesn't really have to do in the same way and hasn't had to refine. Like and again, we could talk about this. Like you watch a mom carry a 30-pound, you know, car seat with an infant in it and a 40-pound 4-year-old in the other arm walk out the door. Like you're developing functional strength just by doing your day-to-day life. Like you are stronger than you think you are just by doing
Mm-hmm.
your life. Like moms will leave the house for a day and dads will like, hey, we logistically planned out the whole thing with the yard and all this, like everything's planned and you've had to become a grown-up really fast, like we talked about. Like you became a real
Mm-hmm.
fully fledged adult when you had kids. Like it's a line
Mm-hmm.
in the sand where like all of a sudden you're really excited about minivans and
No.
fences and I'm
Yes.
excited about minivans and fences and
I am. I am
you
not.
know you have these types of conversations where it's like, okay, we became an adult here, so now I just need to be the adult in my own life. All the things I'm doing with my kids, I've developed these skills and I've refined them over keeping the tiny humans alive. Let me translate them and use them for me. And I'll end here because this is the same idea. And this is not my original idea, but this is the idea. If you want your kids to be tough and persevere, you oftentimes wouldn't just help them through everything without letting them go through some hard experiences.
Right.
If you want them to be creative, you usually wouldn't just tell them exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you want them to be patient, you won't just give them what they want immediately. Right? And we recognize that these are all things that and attributes and traits that we want for our kids. But in order to get them, we have to do and go through, for both them and us, hard things. Right? That's not
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier to just give them what they want when they want it, or do the easy thing for them. Right? It's a lot easier. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this doesn't, like, I'm going to have a tantrum. Like, they want fruit snacks, and it's certainly easier to just give them fruit snacks. But if I want to teach them, like, okay, we can't always get what we want, and whatever else that we're, and acknowledge, like, hey, we're not gonna have fruit snacks for the fifth time today. Like, that's not
Mm-hmm.
gonna fill you up, or whatever it is I'm trying to teach them, some combination of them. I have to be okay with the cost of the tantrum or
Mm-hmm.
the hard
Because
time
it's coming.
or whatever it is. And so this is what it's important to recognize is we oftentimes think that when we come to an obstacle, we've hit the wrong path. But the reality is that the hard way is often the right way. Because
Mm-hmm.
through the hard, over the obstacle, navigating the challenge is what gives us the skills and the resilience and all of those things necessary for what's beyond it. And when we come to an obstacle in the path, when we come to the hard, it's easy to think, oh, I'm going to not do it. But the important thing to recognize is most people don't. And that's why they stay where they are.
Mm-hmm.
The people who do the hard are the people who win. And that's why there are fewer people who succeed. Because if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? That's the
Everyone would
super
do it.
common phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if being fit was
Mm-hmm.
easy, everybody would have a six pack.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. And so we have to recognize the fact that the hard way is the right way. If it was easy to build a business, everybody would build a business. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to recognize that when running my own business gets challenging, that is the difference. Going through that challenge is the difference between me and the people who failed and the people who
Mm-hmm.
didn't make it. And the difference between me and the people in front of me is that they went over this obstacle and they navigated it and they
Right.
struggled with it. They might have tried to climb up and fell down. And so recognize that it's supposed to be hard. But that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that you're on the wrong path. It usually means you're on the right one. And so we have to recognize the fact that it's a superpower for us to be on the hard path. And this is the final thing that I'll say for parents. We keep tiny humans alive every day. We tell them no to fruit snacks. We navigated middle of the night wake ups and them screaming in our faces and the uncertainty of wearing our heart outside of our bodies. We can do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
You parents are more resilient and able to do harder things than people who have not gone through those challenges to this point. it's a little bit of like the trust fund baby thing, right? Like if somebody's just, been handed $1 million versus somebody who works for it, the person handed $1 million oftentimes doesn't really know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But the person who had to work for it is going to be appreciative of it and have the skills it takes to make the next and the next and the next and the next.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the skills. You've done hard things. You can do hard things. You just have to apply it to this scenario, whatever it is in front of you. Oftentimes it's your nutrition and fitness. But don't think about the road not taken, because the road not taken might have seemed easy, but you wouldn't have the same superpowers that you have because you wouldn't have gone over the same hurdles that you've gone over. So that's my spiel
I like it.
on that. You have superpowers. So, hey, listen, if this resonated with you, I'd love it if you shared it with a friend. I think that this is maybe a message that some parents could benefit from hearing. If I do say so myself, I think that it's something that when I talk to a lot of parents, it tends to resonate. So I hope that you will. If you listened, like, rate, subscribe, review, all the things that we do. And again, I'll say it. I'm starting to say it again, at the end of every episode. But if you'd like somebody to, this is like the kind of pep talks that I give to clients, by the way, who are struggling. Like, the way that I determine what we talk about on this podcast is what I've been saying to clients a lot recently. And so I've been saying this a lot to clients recently. So if you need somebody in your corner to kind of be your hype man and talk you off that ledge, I'd love to chat with you about that. Just shoot me a message and we'll go from there. But appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.